My journey to a full ADHD diagnosis began in my early 50s. That was when I left salaried employment for what I realise now was the last time. I had a nervous breakdown at my desk in the office, and it was only then that I was able to perceive the fragile, eggshell thin state of my mental health. When you're inside of a situation like that, it's really hard to externalize the circumstances of your life and to fully comprehend what's going on. Once the smoke obscuring the wreck of my working life began to clear and I was able to more dispassionately assess everything, I came to the conclusion that there was much more than just work stress going on. That period of time when I was able to stop and breathe enabled me to analyze my life, and it gave me the opportunity to start looking for answers. 2 years after I'd fractured from reality at my office desk and was quietly made redundant, that search led to me getting officially diagnosed by a clinical psychiatrist, firstly with autism and secondly with ADHD. And now here I am, over 4 years down the line from that diagnosis, and willing and prepared to ask some important questions of myself. And the biggest question of all is this. Knowing what I do now about neurodevelopmental disorders and how they're diagnosed and treated, was it all worth the hassle? Everyone's journey towards an ADHD diagnosis is different, but for people from Generation X, like me, there is an additional hurdle: ignorance. Now, I accept that the situation was probably different in America, where ADHD was much more well known much earlier than any other country in the world, but where I was raised in the UK, it was unheard of. And not just ADHD, of course, but the entirety of mental health, all of it. When I was a kid, the closest we got to discussing mental health was when some character on a sitcom on TV would make a passing reference to being carted off to the funny farm. Knowledge of mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders such as autism and ADHD weren't just not talked about, they were completely and totally unknown. Psychiatrists were weird lab coat wearing dudes with German accents and leather couches who worked exclusively in London's posh Harley Street and who saw only the wealthy. The treatment of mental health was for the 1%. It would be about 20 years after I left primary school before I even heard of this thing called ADHD, and another 20 after that before it dawned on me that I had it. That ignorance to the disorder and the complete and total lack of knowledge about it meant, of course, that none of my friends or family knew about it either. And that ignorance can be the cause of considerable strife for an adult seeking a diagnosis. Your partner might think ADHD is a load of bollocks, for instance. Your workmates or your employer, your friends, that nosy twat next door, they will all have their own opinions on ADHD, for better or worse. Even if you have a supportive group of friends, an accepting partner, and an understanding employer, you'll run into mouth-breathing fuckwits out here on the internet who think the moon landings were fake and ADHD's a scam created by Big Pharma. So with all that being said, I'll break down the last 6 years of my life, the post-ADHD era, if you like, into the positives and the negatives of getting an official diagnosis and access to meds. So for me, the key benefit to getting officially diagnosed was recognition of the fact that I wasn't simply a lazy, messed up clusterfuck with poor social skills, an addictive personality, bad teeth, weight problems, and a death wish. I mean, I was still all of those things, only, and this is the important bit, it wasn't by design. I didn't willfully decide to constantly gamble with my life when I was a teenager and young man. I didn't willfully fuck up every salaried job I ever had. I didn't willfully burn relationships and money. I did those things because my brain developed differently and I had shortcomings in getting shit done neurotransmitters, along with a smaller cerebellum, hippocampus, and amygdala, leading to impairments in memory, emotion, and behavior. I've said it before and I'll say it again. ADHD is not an excuse for negative behavior, but it is an explanation. That brings us along to what I think is the second biggest benefit: understanding the real life impact of ADHD and just how far reaching this neurodevelopmental disorder's influence can be. My first introduction to ADHD was, I think, an American news story about overstimulated school kids. For many people, this is still the beginning and end of their understanding of ADHD. It wasn't until I was in my early 50s that I began to learn about the true complexity of ADHD and recognized its telltale signature in my DNA. Once I found out that it impaired short-term memory, led to risk-taking and impulsive behavior, disorganization, poor planning, terrible time management, poor multitasking, and low frustration tolerance, along with the hallmark inattentiveness, I knew without a doubt that I had ADHD, and I then set out to prove it. The deficits I just mentioned are written on every page of the story of my life. So, getting an ADHD diagnosis, firstly, let me forgive myself, and secondly, it explained the way I was. That's big picture stuff. Let's talk proper tangible benefits. Knowing what your flaws are is a powerful aid to counteracting them. For instance, part of the reason why I'm overweight and have such bad teeth is that I became addicted to sugar from an early age. Sugar was what I used as a substitute for the dopamine my brain wasn't generating naturally. Consuming all that sugar was absolutely the worst thing I could have done because it further disrupted my already dysregulated brain. But I wasn't to know that when I was deep into a cherry coke and a family pack of Cadbury's minstrels. But now I do know that. And while I still haven't kicked my sugar addiction, and I probably never will, I have tempered it. I gave up the chocolate bars and the energy drinks, and I greatly reduced the amount of processed food I ate. I still fail, of course. Those cartons of strawberry milk in the supermarket chiller call out to me like a line of coke does to a trust fund socialite. Sometimes the ADHD wins, but sometimes that chiller door stays shut, and I take that as a win. Knowing that an inability to plan for anything is a core ADHD behavior has made my family life better. We now have a single unified family calendar, the Hutchinson calendar of chaos and uncertainty, and my wife helps me make up for my ADHD deficiencies by using that calendar. Simple things like noting the date of my next appointment at the hairdresser's at the time it's being agreed on has curtailed organisational issues such as double bookings or not showing up. Okay, let's talk drugs. The legal kind, that is. I'd be lying if I said that access to stimulant medicine wasn't a huge part of the reason I got myself officially diagnosed. Once I disappeared down the ADHD rabbit hole and began voraciously consuming every magazine article, blog post, and YouTube video I could find on the subject, I realised that stimulant medication might help me salvage the last third of my life. I got diagnosed 4 years ago, and apart from a 7-month gap that was not of my doing, I've been taking Ritalin nearly every day since then. Here in Australia, the only legal ADHD meds are dexamphetamine, methylphenidate, or lisdexamphetamine, or Vyvanse, Ritalin, and Concerta to give them their brand names. I was tried out on a couple of useless non-stimulant meds, atomexetine and clonidine, but they didn't work, and in the latter case gave me erectile dysfunction, poor bladder control, and migraines. So they took pity and gave me the good stuff, Ritalin, almost exactly 4 years to the date of filming this video. Ritalin has not cured my ADHD, but it has improved my life in many important areas. There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that I am able to accomplish more when I am taking Ritalin than when I am not. Moreover, the quality of what I am able to accomplish is better too. Ritalin enables me to dial down the distractions that otherwise disrupt any given task I'm working on. It affords me focus and clarity of thought. It's not a mood enhancer in any way, but I am, by all accounts, a much nicer person to be around when the Ritalin's kicked in than when it has not, because I am a fuck sight less frustrated with myself. I like being able to take Ritalin in the 10 milligram pill format because I can tailor the dose according to my day. The maximum amount my psychiatrist agrees I can take in a single day is currently 50 milligrams, but usually I take 40 milligrams. I take 2 pills in the morning with me coffee and 2 at lunch. That sees me through most of the day, but occasionally I need a Mario Kart style bullet bill power up, and I take one in the late afternoon. I always try to take Ritalin if I know I'm going to be driving anywhere, because there is no doubt at all that I'm a much better driver on stimulant medication than when I am not. The benefits of stimulant medication for me are clear. I've accomplished far more in the 4 years since I started on Ritalin than in the 25 before then. I count myself lucky that methylphenidate works on me and that there are no side effects apart from a shorter to-do list. Some folks aren't as lucky. They either have a bad reaction to the drug or it simply doesn't work. If that's the case here in Australia, then tough shit, because the other option, Adderall, is not legal. Dexamphetamine and methylphenidate are the only games in town. If you live elsewhere, you may have access to both. In the USA, you can take your pick from 32 different brands of stimulant medication. So that's the clear positive impact of getting officially diagnosed and medicated. What about the negatives? I've already touched on some of the negative aspects of adult diagnosis and treatment, such as pushback from people you know, but there are, of course, many others. The most obvious drawback to getting officially diagnosed and treated is the difficulty in navigating the bureaucracy. The irony of the situation is not lost on me or on anyone who's seen the process all the way through. The disorder we want to be diagnosed for cripples our ability to plan, to organise and to focus, while also throwing low boredom threshold and a low tolerance to frustration into the mix. If there was ever a perfect storm of symptoms that seemed perfectly designed to stop anyone getting it done, it's them. The path to diagnosis obviously varies enormously all over the world, but in most countries there is usually a sizable wait before you ever get seen by a mental health practitioner of one kind or another. There are triage appointments, follow-ups, consultations and paperwork involved in the whole process. There might as well be the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse if you have ADHD. What makes it worse is if you do throw in the towel, give up, nobody will give a flying fuck, because nobody cares if you get diagnosed or not. There's not some government agency urging you to get checked out, and your friends and family probably couldn't give a shit either, so it's all down to you. One of the biggest downsides to getting diagnosed is the cost. In some countries, ADHD is recognised as an official disability and therefore receives subsidised treatment and medication. But even if it is subsidised, it's still an expensive process because it takes a lot of time to get done. Here in Australia, ADHD is not currently recognised as a disability, and so the only option for diagnosis is a private appointment. In this country, you can only be officially diagnosed by a clinical psychiatrist, and those guys cost money. Expect to pay anywhere between $500 and $900 for that first appointment. Follow-ups cost between $150 and $300 per visit and are required on a regular basis to renew scripts for the extremely tightly controlled dispensing of medical grade stimulants. Pills aren't cheap either. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that many of the people who could most benefit from a diagnosis and stimulant medication are also the ones who can least afford it. Another serious negative to consider before getting diagnosed is that you may alienate or lose friends over it, and your employers may take a less than enlightened view of the situation. People can and do lose their jobs every day because they reveal their ADHD diagnosis and are punished for it, or they admit it on the application and never get to the interview stage. It's something of a catch-22, of course. You want to let your employers know that you have ADHD so that they can best support you and at worst simply be understanding. And some employers will be understanding, mainly public organisations such as local government because they're required to do so by law. But equally, many employers will decide you're trouble and kick you to the curb. On balance, I'd say you are probably better off never revealing your diagnosis to an employer because even if they appear to be understanding of the situation, they can still use it against you at a later date if they require it. So, those are the main positives and negatives as far as I'm concerned. That brings us around to the $64,000 question. Knowing all of the above, is it better to get diagnosed or should you leave it the fuck alone? I strongly believe that if you can afford the time, hassle, and money involved in getting officially diagnosed, then it is worth it. No matter how convinced you are with a self diagnosis that you have ADHD, there is a solid feeling of confirmation when you get an official diagnosis. Some people never proceed with going through the diagnosis process because they're worried the shrink will tell them they haven't got it. I get it. I think all of us who've done it do. I was shitting myself when I was going through my first diagnosis, worried the doctor will give me a knockback and show me the door. All I can tell you is that the feeling of hearing officially is life changing. Depending on where you are, it can be a very expensive process. Based on what I've read and what you guys have told me in the comments section on the ADHD Army videos, I think that being diagnosed here in Australia is amongst the most expensive in the world. If you can get a government funded and or subsidized diagnosis, then I say go for it. Even if the waiting list is a year or more long. You've waited your whole life after all. What's a few months either way? Diagnosis opens the door to getting legal stimulant medication, which has been shown to greatly assist with a couple of the core ADHD deficits. This channel you're watching right now simply would not exist if I wasn't taking Ritalin. I'd be rearranging my sock drawer, hiding treats around the house for the cats to find, staring out the window with that ADHD face. I'm not going to lie to you. The whole diagnosis process is a royal fucking pain in the ass. And even when you get the official nod, you still need to keep jumping through those bureaucratic hoops afterwards too. Officially knowing is a tiny little bit of payback after a lifetime of being told you're fucking shit. Joining the ADHD army is like giving the middle finger to every miserable fuck who told you were a lazy, self-centered, unstable, unhinged, erratic, unreliable reject. And that, my friends, is a beautiful thing.